Well, it wasn't a classic, but Charlton get the job done in Slovenia. Hi there everybody, welcome to the second episode of the From the Valley Floyd podcast, hosted by me, Callum. That wasn't a classic. It was a typical, stodgy, slow, laborious July pre-season game for the Addicks in Slovenia. However, win's a win. It's 2 wins from 2 to start pre-season off. Neither of them particularly comfortable, neither of them particularly decisive. However, Nathan Jones' men have 2 wins from 2. First half was very slow, very stodgy. Nothing seemed to work. Nothing really went well going forward. We had a moment where Lloyd Jones fell into these sort of stairs which were to the side of the right-hand post, causing a little bit of concern on the Addicks bench. However, he was fine to continue. He then got himself booked in a pre-season friendly, which is always funny, for the foul of winning the ball. There are a couple of very strange refereeing decisions this morning in UK time. There was a throw-in that quite clearly came off of a Gorica player. However, they were given the throw. There was something that came off a Gorica player, and it should have been a corner, I think it was, and the referee pointed for a goal kick. However, it doesn't really matter. As I said in the first podcast, you don't need to overanalyze these pre-season performances. I thought Zach Mitchell played relatively well in that first half, almost pushed up as a right back when the Addicks were in possession. I thought he looked good on the ball. Still lacked a little bit of control inside that midfield area, and that's something that I think we're going to see quite often this season when you're playing Doherty in there almost by himself. Second half was a lot better going forward. Miles Leaburn, I thought, looked okay. He got a full 45-minute run around, which is the most important thing. He pressed pretty well for somebody of his size, although he did fall over like a giraffe on ice skates at one point, which was a little bit concerning. However, picked himself up and was straight out running around again. The most exciting part of the game was obviously seeing the first couple of minutes from the new signing Rob Apter, who played, I thought, pretty well in the limited sort of 15-20 minutes that he was out there. Took a shot, there was a bit of a rasp at the goalkeeper. I think made a save from, maybe it went over. But he sort of cut inside a couple of times, beat his man a couple of times, didn't touch the ball too often. But you can see what he brings. And we'll chat about Rob in the next segment of the podcast a little bit more in depth. However, I said it to sort of start the review of the game. Fuller was by far the most exciting part on the pitch. First, he sort of takes this shot. He cuts inside, lovely bit of skill, leaves the defender behind him, takes a really rasping drive. The keeper makes a fairly decent save to keep out. However, then the Addicks had a corner a couple of minutes later. Corey Anderson with quite possibly the worst corner you will ever see, straight down the goalkeeper's throat, and he decides for some completely inexplicable reason to punch it downwards, which led to him punching the ball over his own goal line for the first goal for the Addicks. A couple of minutes later, came Ramsey, lovely ball over the top to the left-hand side where Fuller had moved over to left wing-back, takes the ball, cuts inside, takes a shot / cross. It's hard to tell whether it deflected. It probably did, looking at the flight of the ball. I don't think Ibrahim's going to mind. He'll take the credit for it all day long. On what was a good day for him. Quite frankly, the thing that sort of stuck out for me from this game was the broken Charlton TV tripod that we watched it on. 1 minute it was sort of looking downwards at somebody's arm. The next minute it was straight up into the clouds of Slovenia. A nice view, but not necessarily focused on the footballing action that was happening right in front. And then there was Nathan Jones doing Nathan Jones things for about 15 minutes he held it together before going on a typical sort of Nathan Jones proper rant at players about losing the ball, saying how we looked terrible in a less nice word than terrible when we're turning the ball over. You could just hear him over over the commentary, which was pretty great. I feel for, I believe it was Greg Stubley who was in the commentary box staff. I feel for him because it was hard to see just watching without having to do the commentary, especially against a team where we don't know any of their players. But I'm not going to sit here and overanalyze a friendly. I thought Mekran played well when he came on. Second time he's done that. I thought that Kai Enzen looked okay again, playing in that sort of fullback role. Good to see Amari Bell get his first minutes to Charlton play. Interesting again, much like Reece Burke, he was given the captain's armband. My only worry really coming out of it, and this is only a slight concern, we haven't seen Matty Godden this pre-season. I make the assumption he'll probably play a couple of minutes against Wildston. It'd be good to see him out there. It does be good to see Luke Berry out there, who I haven't seen. I still think coming back from that injury that he got during the playoffs. And also I forgot to mention it was good to see Thomas Kaminski get his first minutes as Charlton number 1. That's all I really want to reflect on in the game in Slovenia. There's not a huge amount to say. It wasn't a great performance. It wasn't a great spectacle. But Charlton got the job done, and I feel as though I'm going to sit in front of this mic and like that quite often throughout this championship season. All right. Well, I think probably now what we'll do is we'll have a look a little bit more in depth at the signing this week that Charlton made of Rob Apter from Blackpool FC. All right. I know I mentioned on last week's podcast that Charlton looked like they were going to seal the signing of Rob Apter from Blackpool. And the Addicks did that this week. A fee somewhere between £2 million and £2.5 million, which may have been the reason why it definitely leaked last week. I think people at the club got a bit excited. They were spending over £2 million on a player. Blackpool sources saying about $2.5 million with add-ons. If that's the case, it would make Rob the most expensive player that Charlton have signed for, I think it's 15 or 16 years. Even if it's just the $2 million, which seems to be the number that Corley is suggesting, it would make Apter the most expensive signing since Naby Sarr was signed from Sporting about 10 years ago. So it's a big outlay for Rob, who's only played one full season in League One. He was Young Player of the Season for Tranmere in League Two, and I believe he played 2 seasons there on Merseyside. He's from the Liverpool area, and it's pretty clear sort of models his game on Jack Grealish. He wears his socks sort of down low, and sort of he's not the fastest winger in the world. He's not slow, but much like Jack, he's not the fastest winger that you'll ever see. And so when he goes to beat a man, it's mainly about sort of skill and control rather than it is him being blazing quick. I thought today he played pretty well. He didn't play for that long. Pretty early on, he took the ball, took it round the man, took his first shot, which the goalkeeper, I believe, made a good save on. Maybe it went over. Sorry, it's hard to see on the broken tripod. But I thought, and I think that my thing with Rob is, where does a player of that expense fit? It costs a lot of money, so you make the assumption that he's been brought in to basically play week in and week out. However, he's not really ever played as a 10, and I don't know defensively if he's good enough to play as a wing-back. I know his numbers comparative to Thierry Small, for example, look pretty good defensively, but he's quite small, and a little bit slight maybe. Not to be harsh on him, it's just, physically that's what he is. And so you do have questions against the better sides, and obviously when we start the season, we play Watford at home, and you think, we could get a scalp against, and then we go away to Bristol City and host them. We host formerly of the Premier League Leicester City a week later. And you kind of look at those games and you go, do I really want Apter to be my fullback in games like that? But he's not really had much experience playing as a 10, although a lot of Blackpool fans will tell you that ultimately he'll end up playing as a 10. He's young, 22. He's very exciting. He stays fit. He's played pretty much every game for Blackpool after Tom Bloxham got himself injured, which meant that they only had one out-and-out winger. But the real question for me is going to be how Nathan fits him into the 5-at-the-back system that we're playing, and how many games against bigger sides Apter actually ends up starting against, and whether the ownership have kind of given Nathan the belief to say, look, we'll spend this money on this player. Ultimately, maybe if he has a good season with us, maybe it's a comp to someone like a Romain Esse who left Millwall to go to Crystal Palace for God knows how much money after a season and a half. But you do look at it, and it does make you think, how many games is Jones going to keep Apter on the bench? How many games is he not going to start when with his price tag what it is? But as I say, I think it's always good when you've got Blackpool fans who seem reasonably upset that he's gone. There've been some pretty daft comments on forums, as there always are. But the main thing that you seem to get, sort of researching it, are Blackpool fans thinking that this is a good deal. It's a good deal for the player. He gets to go and play in the Championship, and you can't begrudge him that. It's a good deal for the club. They get a large fee for a player that came through their academy. And then it's also good for us because we get a good player who ultimately we may be able to sell for quite a lot more than we paid for him. So it feels like a really good bit of business. It's just going to come down to how Nathan makes it work this season and hopefully going forward. Good, it's a 4-year contract. I'd assume there's a club option at the end of that. There normally is if it's a 4-year rather than a 5-year being announced. And I think he's the sort of player that a player like Miles Leaburn will play really well off of this season, and hopefully can set up some goals for Matty Godden. Just for anyone that doesn't know, last season Apter played all but one game, had 11 goal involvements, but actually that should have been 14, as his strikers underperformed the XG to assist number. But moving on, let's have a chat about a striker that's been linked to Charlton. I'm not sure how I feel about Mason Burstow, but let's talk about it in the next segment. I'm not sure exactly where the link started, but there's been some links going around linking Mason Burstow with a return back to the Valley. A graduate of the Charlton Academy, Burstow came through a couple of seasons ago, scored quite a famous header against Fleetwood, 92nd minute winner, I believe it was, and played really well for about 3 or 4 months under the tutelage of former Addicks skipper Johnny Jackson. The thing about Burstow is that in his time at Charlton he was quite raw, right? That 3 or 4 months he was quite raw. And he's sort of a jack of all trades, master of none striker. And if you look at those first 3 or 4 months, there were games where he was playing really, really well. The talent was there, plain to see for everybody. But he actually reminds me a little bit of Ryan Brewster, where you could see the talent, but it's just whether he can actually put it all together. After that 3 or 4 months, Chelsea came calling, and Thomas Angar made it clear we got 1.2 million for him, plus a large sell-on fee, plus a loan back. And I remember at the time that deal was announced, Burstow came on in a game, or maybe came off in a game and was booed. And then he came on as a sub once that deal had all been kind of confirmed, was booed again. And I just remember his body language. I think I was sat in the West Stand at the time. I sit in the covered now, but I sat in the West Stand at the time. I was sort of going game by game that year. And I just sort of shoulders slump. And that concerned me as a fan, because I think that I could completely empathise with them. It's a kid that's come through our academy. He's a Charlton kid who's a Charlton fan growing up. He had a chance to go for life-changing money. I think we'd all make that same decision. But I worried seeing that was a player that almost felt things a little bit too emotionally in the moment. I'm not saying this against showing your emotions, show your emotions, but on a football pitch in a competitive environment, it wasn't a great look, and it wasn't a great bit of body language. Obviously, he went to Chelsea, played in their under-21s for a little while, and then went out to Sunderland on loan. That didn't really work. He came back to Chelsea, and then I believe he was sold. I think he went on loan to Hull and then was sold to Hull. It was a loan to buy sort of thing. And he hasn't lit it up for the Tigers either. I think he's had some injury concerns as a bit of a mitigating factor. But he's the sort of player that still is that same raw talent, jack of all trades, master of none. He's only 23, I think. Maybe he's 22. So there's potential to develop him there, and he's a reasonably big lad. You know, it can be helpful in sort of coming on winning headers. He's a pretty good finisher, I would say, having not watched a ton of him since he left the Valley. And maybe coming home is sort of what he needs. Maybe he needs to come back to someone that's familiar, come back to a manager who's very good at developing young talent, and maybe seeing if he can use sort of re-springboard his career. But if we're going to sign Mason Burstow, just sign Ryan Brewster. He's a better version of Mason Burstow at this point. And, you know, I know wages are a consideration. But I think it's interesting, even if we don't end up signing Burstow, just to kind of look at the options that the club are looking at. Sort of to try and round up and finish Nathan Jones' squad ahead of that first game against Watford on the 9th of August. Okay. For the last segment of today's show, I really want to have a look at Thomas Kaminski a bit more in depth. I really want to have a look at the decision to go for a proper number one, why Kaminski, whether it's a good deal at sort of reported £1 million, and what Kaminski brings, maybe that Man United may not don't have experience-wise and talent-wise. Now, to put my cards on the table, and I think I did this in the previous podcast, I'm a big fan of Thomas Kaminski. I'm a big fan of this deal. I think the number is about right. I think $1 million for a 32-year-old goalkeepers obviously bloom later. He's signed a 3-year contract, I believe it is. It'd be 35. That's still fine for a goalkeeper. He's a good enough goalkeeper that you shouldn't have to worry about getting another number one until the end of that contract. He's on pretty good wages, so the ownership clearly pushed out the boat to go and get a player who was in the Premier League only a couple of seasons ago. In his season in the Premier League, playing for a Luton side which faced a lot of shots, he was excellent. Won save of the season, a really great double save against Palace. And I think he had a really good game that last game of the season as well, away at West Ham, which is down the road from me. But my thing with Kaminski is that I think for those of us who like our goalkeepers to be purist, right? If you're a goalkeeping purist and you're someone who likes that old school, my goalkeeper is there just to keep the ball out of the back of the net, Thomas Kaminski is going to be your type of goalkeeper. He's an excellent shot stopper, one of the best in the country. If you're someone who likes your hybrid-style modern goalkeeper, your Alissons, your Edisons, your Neuers of the world, Thomas Kaminski is not that. Right? But he's calm, he's collected, he's an excellent shot stopper, and his role really will be for a team that, quite frankly, will be in the bookies' favourites to go down. We're probably going to be second favourites, I would imagine, after Sheffield Wednesday. Although I think Hull, maybe, the way things are going, may end up in that same sort of situation. he's going to face a lot of shots. He's going to face a lot of very high-quality shots, I would imagine. And even if Lloyd Jones and Macaulay Gillespie and Reece Burke and Amari Bell and Zach Mitchell, all that, if it all works out, Kaminski's going to be a very, very, very busy goalkeeper. That's just the way it works when you go up into the Championship. But whilst I do have my own concerns, I'm someone who actually prefers a hybrid approach to goalkeepers. I like someone who can distribute, but I also like someone who is a good shot stopper. I look at Kaminski and I go, I do have concerns over dominating the box, but I realise Lloyd Jones is playing centre-back, Macaulay Gillespie playing centre-back. They win most things in the air. Even going up a division, I think they'll still be winning most things that they're in the sky. And I went back and re-watched, actually, the second half of the Leyton Orient game at Wembley, just because I was feeling a little bit like I needed to pick me up last week. What a fascinating life I live. But looking at some of the balls that Mannion claimed, and some of them he claimed really, really well, they're all kind of within that 6-yard area, in the area where your goalkeeper really should be coming to make a basic claim. Kaminski is a big enough goalkeeper. And I think I may have said this in the previous podcast, but he was not helped by the fact that Luton quite literally had no fit centre-backs at times, and the defence was being chopped and changed, and it was clear that Rob Edwards had lost the dressing room, and players weren't necessarily throwing themselves in front of everything, and all these sort of mitigating factors that can come up for a goalkeeper of that level who maybe quote-unquote underperformed last season. I think every Luton player underperformed last season, except for maybe Taylor Asgard and the lad that they signed from Exeter. So I look at Kaminski and I think that he's a step up. I think he brings a lot of experience. He's won trophies in Belgium. He's won trophies in Denmark. He's took Luton up, being promoted. I think he helped Blackburn avoid relegation. He's a very exciting signing for a very unexciting position. What I want from Kaminski this season is to be a leader. He's the most experienced member of the squad, I think, probably along with Amari Bell. But more than that, I want someone who will make the saves that he should make. He'll communicate effectively with his centre-backs who are going to be facing football at far faster speed than they're used to. And I want someone in there who can inspire confidence in me rather than the stress that sometimes I felt over the past few seasons. This is the first time we've had a real number one going into a season since Craig McGivray, and what I mean by a proper number one is someone that you know will start every week as long as they're fit. Barring injury or something catastrophic, Kaminski will play. He'll play week in, week out. He may even play the cup games. And so my hope is that this ends up being a good signing for everybody. Luton get a player off the wage bill who made it clear he didn't want to play in the third division because he wants to be in the Belgium squad. Kaminski plays week in, week out, and is able to get that call up to probably be the third choice keeper for Belgium at the World Cup next year. And that we get a goalkeeper who maybe finds a little bit of that old Premier League form playing at the Valley. But I thought that it'd be a good time to mention, actually, in today's game, that Marino Burrow made a number of good saves. However, he punched the ball back out into the 18-yard box twice. And he really needs to work on softening those palms and softening those wrists. Because at the moment, it's too much panic. There's too much franticness inside the box. When you have Marino Burrow in there, and I've said this before, and I'll stand by this, I thought, well, Mannion was excellent in the playoff run, but that was because the playoff run played to his strengths and he didn't have to do much shot stopping, which I think is always the iffy bit about Mannion. My friends and I, when we sort of sat, I always say, if you could combine Mannion's ability to distribute and control his area with Ashley Maribori's reflex shot stopping, you'd have a really excellent goalkeeper. I think what we've done in reality is we've just gone and bought someone who we know will be a good player, who will do the things he's supposed to do, and hopefully that will mean that this deal works out for everybody. Alright then, I think we'll leave the pod there. Just before I go, I just wanted to point out that I made 2 factual errors in the first episode. Firstly, we didn't lose to Lincoln City at the Valley before Nathan Jones came in. Obviously, we lost to Northampton. And then also I mentioned that Sonny Carey had played 50 games in the Championship and played quite a few of those at Norwich. He hadn't. He's from that part of the world, but he actually went from Kings Lynn to Blackpool, so he played his Championship experience all with the Seasiders. But with that, yeah, I'd like to end the podcast there. Thank you so much, those of you that have been listening. I promise you, I'll have the website set up in the coming weeks. I'm working with a designer to get that all set up. I want that to all be really, really professional. I'll have some ways for you guys to support the pod. Maybe to get you guys on the pod, have a conversation before the Watford game, and hopefully just kind of create a bit of a community of fans that maybe want to look at games in a very sort of critical analytical perspective. All right. Once again, thank you for listening. This is From the Valley Floyd. My name is Callum Alston. Have a lovely weekend, and up the Addicks.